Hello and welcome to episode 227 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, as always joined by Evan Silva. Fantasy drafts are on the horizon very shortly. It is time for us to finalize our plans from both a macro and micro perspective. For this, Evan and I are joined by the man, of course, with no soul. He has been working on the spreadsheets for your draft kit for the last 6 months, and therefore it's translucent. It is Michael Leone. Michael, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm hoping once the season kicks off, I'll be able to get outside, get some color, but it might be too late at that point.
Evan, how's it going?
Doing well. We just recorded a quarterback show, so check that out. Looking at every level of the quarterback field this year, but now we're going to talk about maybe the most important position in all of fantasy.
And the most controversial. I mean, my God, If you guys are on fantasy Twitter, the running back position has turned into a full-blown civil war in the fantasy community. We will touch on that as well. On today's show, as we mentioned, it is the second part of a 4-part series. We're going to break down all things running back for the 2021 football season. Tiers, optimal strategy, guys we like, guys we don't, etc. Before we get into that, if you have a season-long fantasy draft coming up and you plan to play DFS, the best game, I highly recommend you get our bundle package. We'll cover everything you need from now until the Super Bowl, and it is our lowest possible price. Check it out on the subscribe page. Second, the Underdog promo. They just launched the Puppy 3, I believe it is, $5. And I believe, Leone, is it $500K prize pool on $5, which is just absolutely outrageous. Regardless, it's absolutely massive, and you can get 7 entries onto Underdog for free if you make a $10 deposit. Just go to the Underdog section on the homepage in the Best Ball tab. All right, let's get into it here, boys. With the running back position, there has been so much talk. I'm actually really sick of it. There has been so much talk about what the right strategy is at the running back position in fantasy, but it's actually gone mainstream at this point. Like, it used to just be fantasy virgins who would argue about this running back stuff. Now even like dudes in my home league are like, oh man, let's talk about this zero RB thing or the dead zone and stuff like that. I mean, it's gotten completely out of control. Leone, without going too far into the weeds with all this fantasy virgin nonsense, can we talk about a macro strategy for you at the running back position specific to this year? Not always, specific to this year.
Yeah. Can I give a quick always spiel? What? Yeah. Well, here's why there's like the running back civil war. An elite running back season does more for your fantasy team success than anything else. And the best way to get an elite running back season is to draft a running back early. The flip side to that is if you don't get that elite running back season, it's, quietly hurts your fantasy team in a lot of ways because you're not as strong at receiver. You're not as strong in the flex. It's quietly replaceable, or it's just an outright bust due to injury rates and the fact that the position is so volume dependent. So that's why you have these conflicting viewpoints, because each side, so to speak, does have like a legitimate reason for why they do or don't draft running backs early. For me, I'm generally a pretty wide receiver heavy drafter early. Every draft is different. You need to know your settings. If you're drafting in a half PPR league with 2 wide receiver, 2 running backs, 1 flex, there's more leeway to get running back heavier earlier. If you're in a full PPR league with 3 wide receivers and 1 flex and only 2 running backs, you better start hitting your receivers because you want to beat people at wide receiver 1, 2, 3. You want a wide receiver in the flex and beat them there and beat them all the way down the line. And then, you can get lucky at running back later just by churning the waiver wire and paying attention and kind of just being a smart fantasy manager overall.
Yeah. And I think those are great points. I think for me, typically running back in round 1 or round 2 makes sense. I think the difference this year, Evan, is beyond CMC and Dalvin Cook, we can poke major holes at almost every running back that goes in round 1. You can go back and listen to our round 1 breakdown where Evan and I went player by player, and we talked about the downside case for a lot of these running backs that are going in round 1. And one of the conclusions we came to, and I still believe, is that I have no problem going Kelsey or Devontae Adams or Ridley or Steph Diggs in round 1 over one of these running backs. But anyways, Evan, zooming out, how are you thinking about the running back position specific to this year?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that you can even poke holes in Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey to some extent, because Dalvin Cook has an injury history that dates back deep into his time at Florida State. And Christian McCaffrey has been injured quite a bit recently. Now, we're not into predicting injuries here. So, we filter that out to some extent, but it's just a testament to the fragility of the running back position in general. I think that, although it's not a sexy thing to say, it's not like a flashy thing to say, it sounds kind of boring, but just knowing your league scoring and your league settings better than your opponents and knowing how to apply your league scoring and your league settings to your draft is actually the number one advantage that you can have over your opponents in fantasy football. My favorite way to draft, generally speaking, and I really abide by I'm going to make, a list of or top 20 rankings and sort of abide by those with my first 2 picks, and then let that, who I get with those first 2 picks, determine how I'm going to approach the rest of my draft. My favorite way to draft is with getting an anchor running back in the first or second round, and then just filling up the rest of my draft with pass catchers and coming back maybe in the 7th or the 8th with like Raheem Mostert, or even waiting, to like Nyheim Hines, and sort of piecing together my RB2 slot and just making sure that I am loaded because I play in all PPR leagues and at very least half PPR. Making sure that I have elite receivers for all of my starting slots, and ideally 1 or 2 more, and also an elite tight end, or at least a tight end that I believe can score within the top 6.
Yeah, and I like that strategy as well. When we talked about it, you guys can go back and listen to the podcast that Leone, Jack, and I did. I hope you all listened to that about how we think about drafting from certain positions. I think the round 2 RBs this year are really interesting, and I want to focus on them for a second, Leone, because the draft can turn there. Because if you really like Mixon, Antonio Gibson, sometimes Eckler gets there, Najee is in the second round, sometimes Saquon Barkley gets there, CEH is available in there. There are a lot of running backs with massive ceilings, I think, going in the second round. So how you view those running backs, I think, is really important, because if you don't want to start RB, which whatever, I have no problem starting RB, but if you don't want to start RB, you're missing out, and you take an RB in round 1, you're missing out on, I think, really big ceilings in those round 2 guys. The floors are lower, but man, the ceilings on CEH and Najee and Gibson and even Mixon, I think, are absolutely massive. Eckler too. So Leone, what is your take on handling these round 2 RBs right now?
Yeah, I think like having a handle on what your league's going to do is really important, because as you mentioned, you can take Kelsey, Devontae Adams, Diggs in round 1, but you kind of want to make sure one of these high upside round 2 running backs is going to make it back to you. I almost don't even care which one it is, as long as one of them is going to make it back to me. I think Antonio Gibson is the guy we focus on a lot as far as, quote unquote, legendary upside. Pat Kerrane, who, used to do some stuff for us at ETR, now NBC Sports Edge, wrote a really good article about running backs having that elite running back season that, again, is more important than anything in fantasy. And it's backs that are efficient and explosive and can make big plays. We've seen that from Antonio Gibson, in his first year at the NFL level. We saw it in college. If you just look at the number of touchdowns he scored relative to his touches, it was insane. The one thing we didn't see a ton of last year was him playing third downs, him catching the ball, but he was a receiver in college. We know he can do that. So if he adds that to his game, if he's able to cut into JD McKissick's role over the course of the season, or even take over it in addition to what he already did as 2-down back last year, the upside's absolutely immense. So I like Gibson there. Najee Harris, there's some questions about his explosiveness, especially behind this Pittsburgh Steelers offensive line, but he's going to see an absurd amount of volume for a young back. He's going to play 90% plus of the snaps. He's going to be there on all downs. A lot of upside there. CEH playing with Patrick Mahomes and the highest projected scoring offense in the entire NFL, a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield. Again, that was a really important component of Crane's analysis. Guys that have the ability to catch the football, they just have a higher ceiling. It's just harder to manufacture that if you're not catching it a lot. So I like those guys. And then on the flip side, someone like Nick Chubb, who I do think is efficient, I do think is explosive, but he's a guy who's splitting carries and doesn't see a lot of targets. That's tough. If Kareem Hunt gets hurt, maybe we see him have that huge upside, but without an injury, the path for him achieving this kind of legendary upside is a little bit tougher. So he's one of the guys I am fading in round 2.
Yeah. The Najee stuff drives me crazy. The people are just nitpicking on talent and offensive line play. I think they're nitpicking really hard, and we know volume trumps everything at the running back position, Evan, any takes on the round 2 guys? How comfortable do you feel with them at this point? Because I do think it's a big turning point in the draft. If you're big on Mixon, Gibson, Eckler, Barkley, CEH, Najee, it's a big turning point in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, these are just guys that, I think that they all have a chance to finish as, top 8 fantasy running backs. Every single guy that Leone just discussed. And we're in lockstep on who these tier 2 running backs, these second round running backs should be. But they all have pretty big holes that you can poke in them. And those are the reasons that they just have more holes than the guys in the first round. Jonathan Taylor is the guy that was going, I would see him go like 7th overall early in the process, and his ADP has come down a little bit. I'm curious if it's come down enough though. He's got the Nyheim Hines factor to deal with. Marlon Mack, who was the Colts Week 1 starter last year, he has returned. The injuries to Quentin Nelson and Carson Wentz, how much are those going to affect him? And the Colts start out with a really, really difficult schedule to the extent that they could start out like 1-4, 0-5. And he is one of the running backs that is most game script dependent because he doesn't have a locked in passing game role. I don't know. I think Leone did a good job of covering all the other guys, but yeah. Jonathan Taylor, I think, has become a really interesting guy to talk about at this stage.
There's like so many guys too. And again, this is kind of why it's important to know what your league mates are going to do, but we love Aaron Jones. We think he could be a top 5 back at the end of round 1. Saquon, if he falls because people are like overly scared by injury, that's fine. He'll get worked in to start the year. He's one of the few guys that has this absurd combination of, freak athleticism and the best role possible in terms of getting that diversified workload at the goal line, in between the 20s, in the passing game. We didn't mention Joe Mixon, who now Giovanni Bernard's gone, and he's probably going to play more passing downs than he did in the past. He's kind of like poor man's Ezekiel Elliott to me. So I was not arguing, but I was going back and forth with Drew because he's very on Antonio Gibson, who I mentioned that I like, but I was like, well, there are some like downside risks. And at the end of the day, these guys all rank similarly. I think you can go any of them in round 2. You don't want to be a ranking slave too much here, where if you have a feeling on one of these guys, I think you go for it. Just kind of understand you're really aiming for ceiling with this pick.
Okay. More importantly, I think, is this whole idea of the RB dead zone and what goes on in the middle rounds. And this is something I've been doing for years, is trying to avoid this middle of the draft at the running back position. Leonard Fournette was a good example last year. He ended up getting cut, but guys whose volume, the public assumes their volume is more stable than it actually is. And the only reason they're fantasy assets is because of their volume. I think there are some exceptions this year, which we'll get to, but my strategy is not to take running backs in the middle rounds. I'm out on Chris Carson. I'm out on David Montgomery. I'm out on Mike Davis. I know some of you guys disagree. I think Evan and Leone disagree with some of these, but again, Carson, Montgomery, Mike Davis, Kareem Hunt, Josh Jacobs, Myles Gaskin, Chase Edmonds, all these guys, I think that people are projecting volume that is more fragile than they realize. And so I'm taking wide receiver in this range where guys aren't going to lose their role. And even quarterback. If you go back and listen to the quarterback episode, I talked about how I'm fine taking quarterback in round 5, round 6 this year, where I haven't in the past because of the separation there. I think Pitts is okay if it's in the right spot. I think Evan likes Mark Andrews. So like all these guys to me are better picks than the running backs in this round 3 to round 6 or so. Evan, I know we've talked about this a lot. I think you like Carson more than me. I think Leone likes Mike Davis more than me. But generally speaking, how are you thinking about these middle rounds and the running back spots?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm willing to take any of these guys if they just fall past their ADP. If they fall into my lap, then I'm willing to take any. The guy that I've really warmed up to over the past couple of weeks is Darrell Henderson, because the indications are that the Rams truly are committed to him. I think that they still will add a back, but I'm really, I've warmed to the notion that they're probably not going to get a very good back. They've been giving Xavier Jones, actually, sprinkling him in with the first team. And I think they're feeling good about him as the number 2 back at this point. Darrell Henderson is going to be running behind a pretty good offensive line in a bankable offense with the arrow pointing up after the addition of Matthew Stafford. He's very competent in the passing game. I don't think that they're going to rely on him to be, like with Cam Akers, they would have no problem giving him 25 carries in a game. I don't think they're going to do that with Darrell Henderson, but I think that they will. I think he's going to be efficient based on the offensive environment. So he has really moved up. I opened right after Cam Akers got hurt. I opened with him as like RB25. He's up to RB17 in my rankings. But yeah, I mean, any of these, and I've started to get him in drafts. Like, I think where he goes, he's pretty affordable. You know, listening to Ben Gretsch and Leone's show, you know, Leone was like, man, I think he should be like almost a fringe second or third rounder, or at very least a third rounder. And I mean, you can kind of consistently get him at the end of the fourth, if not the fifth. So he's been somebody that I really have my eye on at this point.
If Cam Akers was just never existed, Darrell Henderson's ADP would be in like the second round. But because Cam Akers was the quote unquote guy, and then he got hurt, and people view Darrell Henderson as this like dusty backup or whatever they think, or they're anchored to their priors on Darrell Henderson or whatever, you can get him in the fourth or the fifth. That was one of my exceptions. I have 3 exceptions in the dead zone, Leone. My 3 exceptions that I like are Darrell Henderson, who I've been taking a ton of, Miles Sanders when he gets to the 5th round, and Travis Etienne, who just fits the profile of the kind of back who I want to have. I know some people think DeAndre Swift is also an exception in the dead zone. I'm okay with that. Not as much though, because he typically goes in round 3. Leone, what are you thinking about the middle rounds, how it pertains to running back this year?
Yeah, I think, you know, we just recorded the quarterback show before this, and we're kind of like, you know, the skeleton key there in home leagues is Trey Lance and Justin Fields going way too cheap. For running back, it is Darrell Henderson. If you can get Darrell Henderson round 4, even early round 5, I mean, you can almost bank on him as your one early running back and just be absolutely loaded at receiver outside of that. I think the upside's massive there. That's a huge swing. You mentioned Swift. So the idea with Swift is he has the traits that we want in a running back. You know, he's very athletic. He's really explosive in the receiving game. You know, he had success as a goal line back last year towards the end of the year. That if we were to kind of zoom out and not worry as much about the systemic risks of how bad Detroit's going to be, he might fit. I'm with you though, where he still just goes in a tough spot, you know, where Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, like these receivers you really want go. I'd still like him to probably fall. And to Evan's point, most of these guys I'm probably not taking unless they come at an ADP discount, but Henderson is the one that I will take ahead of ADP. I think we're united on that. J.K. Dobbins is someone we haven't talked about yet, who I'm avoiding. He's kind of in between round 2 and 3. I did a busts video earlier in the year. I call him a silent killer, where he's going to be fine. He's going to put up rushing yards. He's going to put up rushing touchdowns. He's going to be like the end of year. If your team's bad with J.K. Dobbins, you're going to not think it's because of Dobbins. It's just the opportunity cost is too high. He's not going to have one of those elite running back ceiling performances because they're going to split carries. He's not going to catch the ball a ton. So I'm out on him. And then as far as guys like Kareem Hunt, Mike Davis, as you move down, I do like Mike Davis a little more than you, but part of it's just pushback. He's become kind of the face of like the RB dead zone. You can't draft guys like this. And I do think he's pretty well suited for the high value touches that we care about, where he's going to catch the ball a lot. And what I think is going to be very pass happy offense in Atlanta. I think he's going to get the goal line carries. So I don't need him to get 20 plus touches, right? Like that is fringy. He's probably not going to be this huge workhorse. A lot of people think, but if I get in PPR leagues, a lot of receptions, a lot of goal line touches, I'm fine taking him, but even still casual league ADP is too high on him. You know, he's going in the first 5 rounds. I want him in round 6, maybe round 7, because I really want, honestly, by round 8, I want like 6 wide receivers on my team, maybe 5, you know, depending on your format, if it's a 2 or 3 wide receiver start league.
Yeah. And to agree with Leone on Mike Davis, I mean, just look at the backs that are in the backfield in Atlanta behind him. I mean, we're talking about Quadri Allison locked in as the Falcons' number 2 running back. This guy has been in the league for multiple years and done nothing. A plodding 5th round, you know, former 5th round pick. I mean, can't play. You know, people were talking about this Javian Hawkins guy, undrafted free agent, rookie, who's like 184 pounds as potentially being, you know, one of their key backups behind Mike Davis. We're bringing in Arthur Smith, and I think that he's going to help make the offense a lot more efficient. They're going to do smart things offensively. And I think that Mike Davis has 60 catches, if not 70, in his range of potential outcomes. Mm-hmm. So, again, he is one of these running backs that I'm probably not going to take at his ADP, but if he falls a little bit, then I'll definitely take him as my RB2, if not RB3. I mean, he's going late enough that in some drafts you could get him as your RB3.
Yeah. Go ahead, Leone.
The other thing to be aware of in this range is if you're in a home league, typically 6 out of 12 teams or something make the playoffs. If a lot of, your league makes the playoffs, these guys that have a lot of value come draft day because we're projecting them for early season volume, it's not going to happen at the end of the year. We care more about monster teams. Like, you're probably sharper than your league mates. You can survive some Nyheim Hines scores in your RB2 spot for a while. So I'm more likely to take, a Travis Etienne, who could just be like a huge home run smash by the end of the year come playoff time, than a Josh Jacobs who might, filter out, for example, especially at cost. Javonte Williams, I'd rather have than Myles Gaskin, where maybe Myles Gaskin cedes work to Salvin Ahmed and Malcolm Brown over the course of the season. And Javonte might have a rough start, but he overtakes Melvin Gordon by the end of the year. It's a smash. So really focusing on the younger players, the guys that can crush at the end of the year and won't lose volume, is important. And ultimately, I think I'm in a Miles Sanders, like you said, 2 left. I do not understand how he became, a 4th, 5th round pick. I don't think that much has changed from last year. But in general, though, I think a lot of these guys on the surface feel a lot safer than the rounds 8+ running backs. But in actuality, they're not that much safer, which is why, hey, just take more receivers and load up there.
Yep, exactly. And okay, so we get to this point in the draft now where we're into round 7, we're into round 8. We might only have 1 or 2 running backs. One thing we've done on ETR in the draft kit is published a list of our favorite late round running back targets. You can view that on the site now, round by round, running backs who we think we like if you are thin there. I am fine waiting for Javonte Williams, as Leone said, Trey Sermon, AJ Dillon, Michael Carter, James Conner. All these guys are available in rounds 9, 10, or 11. And as Leone said, I don't think they're that different than some of the guys going around 4, 5, 6, particularly at the end of the year with Javonte and Sermon and maybe even Dillon. Like, roles are going to grow for young players as the year moves along. So I really like that round 9, 10, 11 range. I think you can get by with standalone value with upside for a lot more on these guys. Evan, we talked about Michael Carter and Trey Sermon a bunch yesterday. Javonte Williams, I think you recently moved up in your rankings. By the way, Evan's latest ranking sweep is up. James Conner, I think, is going to have the goal line role undoubtedly as the 1B for the Cardinals. So all these guys I like if you need running back in round 9, 10, 11. What do you think about this range?
Yeah, just moved up Javonte Williams. There was when all that buzz kind of came out that Melvin Gordon was like the locked in Broncos #1 running back, I moved Javonte Williams down. I just moved him right back up. I think he's at RB23 right now. Melvin Gordon has been dealing with a groin injury, although he did return to practice today. But Mike Boone is out indefinitely after with a serious quad injury. So that narrows the backfield down to 2. And I think that Melvin Gordon is pretty surmountable for Javonte Williams. By the way, the coaching staff loves Javonte Williams. Pat Shurmur has come out and talked about how Javonte Williams is just a dude that gets it, that he's been really good in blitz protection. And then in the first preseason game, he came out, he was just breaking tackles at will. And Vic Fangio came out and talked about how, he's like, that's all we needed to see from that guy. Like the guy was like, he was one of the best tackle breakers in NCAA last year. And he gets right in there, and that skill translates immediately. So I'm excited about him. I do think he's going to open the season in a rotation, but as the season progresses, he's going to be harder and harder for them to take off the field. Raheem Mostert is a guy that the 49ers kept on ice in week 1 of the preseason. They played Trey Sermon a ton. I love Trey Sermon. I have Trey Sermon ahead of Raheem Mostert, but I think that Raheem Mostert, because of all the buzz that Trey Sermon has generated, has reached the point of being undervalued and is one of those running backs that you could get in the 7th or 8th round as your RB2, and you could be fine, until maybe you find a better option on the waiver wire where, hey, if Trey Sermon goes down, all of a sudden Raheem Mostert goes from a guy getting 10 to 12 touches per game to maybe 14 to 17 in a Kyle Shanahan offense, and he's wrecking. So he's become one of my favorite later round running backs, Raheem Mostert.
Yeah. And Leone, I was going to ask about sleepers, but I think this range is actually where I would cut it off for like home league type formats, because I think in your home league, like Michael Carter and AJ Dillon and guys like this and James Conner, like they're not going to go high. You know what I mean? You're not going to have to spend a lot of draft capital to get these guys. So I don't want to go too deep at running back. We do have some good options in tougher formats, I think, with the guys like Gio Bernard and Rashad Penny, but I don't think that's necessary in home leagues to rely on guys like that. What do you think about this round 9, 10, 11 range, and any other sleepers you want to mention at running back?
Yeah, I mean, and just starting with what you said, that it's not hard to get these guys at this point is really critical to what you do earlier in the draft and why you need to not load up on running back. Maybe you take one early, maybe you take two, but don't take more than that, because you can get these guys here. And then that lets you build that monster team with just awesome wide receivers. Maybe you take a detour for a onesie position, go elite tight end or elite quarterback. But I just did a draft where I was very wide receiver heavy early. And then at the 8-9 turn, I took AJ Dillon and Zach Moss. I like those two quite a bit, where they're both on good offenses that are going to score a bunch. AJ Dillon, I think, has standalone value as a really efficient rusher. You know, they're not going to give 90% of the touches to Aaron Jones as much as we would like to see that. So I think that he's going to have some touchdown upside. And then if anything happens to Aaron Jones, you know, the upside's through the roof. And I really like these guys that have that combination of standalone value plus some elite upside. So Zach Moss, upside's not as high as AJ Dillon, so I'm a little bit behind, but similar thing where I think he's got the goal line role locked up for Buffalo there. And if anything happens to Devin Singletary, all of a sudden we get a lot of touches to Zach Moss. But if I'm really swinging for the fences, and one of the cool things we did in this late round running back targets article is we gave blurbs so you know what kind of bet you're making, because depending on how you've constructed, you might want to save for a guy that's just going to get you points. That's Nyheim Hines. You know, I think Nyheim Hines is going to have a really solid role in the passing game, and he still does have some upside. But if you're really just swinging for the fences, you know, take a guy like Tony Pollard, where if anything happens to Zeke, all of a sudden you've got a top 5 back. So just kind of managing the running backs you have here late, you kind of want a mixture of guys that are a little safer who you can plug and play so you don't bleed points at the position, but you also want to stash guys that have just this elite league winning upside where if you hit on them, you've just absolutely destroyed the competition, especially if you've only taken like one running back early and you hit on Dillon or Pollard in a big way, because then you're just boosting that RB2 score so much. Whereas if you've drafted super running back heavy early, it's still a big win, but you might have, you know, more trouble figuring out where to put them in your starting lineup.
And I wanted to add to the back end of that list, and I know, Adam, you didn't want to get too deep here for the home leagues, but Darrington Evans, I still think is draftable, like with one of your last picks, even in a home league. He was a guy that the Titans drafted in the 3rd round last year. He is an explosive dude. He was hurt a lot as a rookie, but he's healthy now. And in the Titans' first preseason game with Derrick Henry resting, it was all Darrington Evans early in the game, like almost operating as an every down back. And it's clear that he is ahead of Jeremy McNichols and Brian Hill in the pecking order. If something were to happen to Derrick Henry, who, by the way, you know, has led the NFL in carries in each of the last 2 seasons, I think the entire complexion of the Titans offense would change. They would become much more pass heavy. You know, they've got 3 receivers that they can trot out with confidence, I think, in Julio Jones, AJ Brown, and Justin Reynolds. And their OC, Todd Downing, when he was the OC for the Raiders, his offense that year in 2017 finished 30th in rushing attempts. So I think the entire complexion of the offense would immediately change if Derrick Henry were to get hurt. And all of a sudden, Darrington Evans would be, you know, like a 50 catch guy potentially.
The thing about that is it's impossible for Derrick Henry to get hurt because he's actually broken the PSM. He's actually broken.
Never been hurt in his life.
I know. He's not getting hurt. Famous last words. I would throw one more name in there for really deep league people. I think Damian Williams is interesting. Yes. I think this Tariq Cohen situation is bad, man. And so Damian Williams' talent level is way better than people think. Had a year off to rest his body and get it right. I think he can get like 25% of the RB touches out of the gate. And then also obviously go completely nuclear or be really good if something happened to David Montgomery. So I'd throw that one out there as well. I was going to ask about bust, but I feel like we've covered a lot already. Chubb and the dead zone guys that I mentioned and Dobbins. Any other busts you want to mention? Leone, it's okay if not. We've kind of covered most of them, I think.
I think those are the minor ones. I'm a little weary of David Montgomery, but there's some more outs there with what you just mentioned with Tariq Cohen, where, now all of a sudden both Montgomery and Damian look a little bit better. So I think that's pretty much it for me. As the two guys that I'm most avoiding at ADP are probably going to be Chubb and Dobbins, more so Dobbins. Like if Chubb fell all the way to round 2 and was like the last of the tier, I would take him if I didn't have a running back. I also throw Josh Jacobs, I think in casual league ADP, he's really starting to get up closer to RB 17. We have him right now at Fantasy Pros. It's a 3rd round ADP. That's really, really rich for me for a back that is mostly a 2-down back.
Oh, that's a brutal ADP.
Yeah, I think the offense is going to regress here from last year too. So I think like last year was almost your best case scenario. Like that's your absolute ceiling. And there's so much risk then. If that's your ceiling, there's so much risk. So I'll throw Josh Jacobs in the bust, category.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Jacobs goes in like the 6th or 7th round now on Underdog. Please be aware that when you go and play your home league, the ADPs are not going to be like they are on Underdog by any stretch. Evan, any bust you want to mention that we haven't hit on yet?
Well, I think that Myles Gaskin is interesting to talk about just because last year, he played in 10 games. In those 10 games, he was the overall PPR RB8 in points per reception scoring. So he was entering training camp. I mean, it felt like he was in pretty good shape. The Dolphins additions amounted to Malcolm Brown on a 1-year, $1.75 million deal and Jared Dokes late in the 7th round. I mean, that's pretty much all they added. They were bringing back Salvin Ahmed, but he's on the fringe of really being an NFL player. And Myles Gaskin goes into the first preseason game and Malcolm Brown is playing well ahead of him. So I don't know. I feel like those roles could reverse easily in the second preseason game, but all of a sudden he looks like he's on the ropes. And at very least, this is going to be a committee of some sort. Salvin Ahmed is a good little change of pace back. Malcolm Brown, coaches love this guy. And all of a sudden, this could be maybe even a 3-way RBBC. Last year, he was like an every down back when he was in there.
It just gets back to the point of assumption of projectable volume that is more fragile than people realize. And that's kind of the theme here that I think is a big edge over our boys from college who we are going to really destroy this year in fantasy football, of course. All right. That's going to do it for the running back positional breakdown. We'll be back with wide receiver. We'll be back with tight end later in the week. For producer Luke, for Leone, for Silva, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.